Happy Friday and happy Neurodiversity Day. I am your host, Catherine McCord, and I could not be more excited about this episode because it's a cool topic. We're going to be talking about fashion and inclusion, and I have two absolutely amazing human beings, one of which you'll definitely recognize, one of which will be a new face, but trust me, you're going to love him. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and bring in my guests. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
How are you both doing? And so I want you to each introduce yourselves because you're amazing humans, and I don't think I can possibly do you justice. So we're going to start with Ms. Walley all the way over there. What direction? You're that way. All the way over there.
Okay. Absolutely. So I'm Antisha Walley. I go by Tisha. I have been in human resources for a little over 12 years now. I loved it so much in government that I actually left and I started my own HR consultancy. So for the past 3 years, I have been the CEO, president, owner, managing director, all of those things of Make the Change LLC. So I am super happy to be here. And one of the things that we do at my company, in addition to professional development, is we help small businesses and startups create their HR processes, or if they have HR processes, we help them to improve them. So that's a little bit about me and what we do.
Love it. Thank you so much, Tisha. And by the way, the reason I've had people ask me, they're like, well, she says Tisha, why do you say Miss Walley? I said, because Walley is one of my favorite names, so I just love that I get to call somebody that. So it just happens to be one of my favorites. All right. So Alex, who also has one of my favorite names, we discussed that before the show. Tell us a little bit about you.
First of all, I love the intro. Like, definitely thinking it. I was like,
thank you to my sister for that.
Let's do it. So my name is Alexandre Lemaitre. That's the French way to say it. So I'm 24. I'm a para-athlete. I'm a model as well. So I was one of the first models to do the Brussels Fashion Week. So that's kind of why I'm here. I'm an activist on inclusion and specifically on physical disabilities and on accessibility on social media on all platforms, really.
I love it. I absolutely, and I think I follow you on all the platforms except for Twitter because I don't do Twitter. But I think,
I don't do Twitter either, so
good. That makes me feel good. Then I've got all of them covered. And I do highly recommend following both of these humans, by the way, because they are remarkable. Their content is great, fun, smart, and always thought provoking. Absolutely love it. So now we're gonna dive into fashion. And by the way, I just want to throw this out there. So both of my guests have assured me that I do not look naked. And I just want to let everyone know that I am, in fact, wearing a dress. And I decided that since we were talking about fashion, that I was just going to wear whatever I was wearing before the show for once. So, and this is actually my pride dress, which is also fitting for this month. So as we dive into this topic of fashion and inclusion, because it's something that surprises people. That what you wear matters and all that all of that's part of inclusion as well. So we know some of the more talked about topics, right? Like we have, hairstyle, things like that. I do want to dive into that. But before we do, I am just curious, what is something, and Alex, we're going to start with you. Give us one or two things that may surprise people that is part of accessibility, inclusion, or any other type of inclusion in fashion.
So can you please repeat the question? Sorry,
Oh yeah, no, you're good. So what are a few things about fashion that may surprise people that pertains to inclusion or accessibility? So like, what are some things about clothes that are not necessarily accessible that it makes sense to allow people to wear something different?
Well, I mean, if you have a physical disability, putting clothes on is already a challenge in and out of itself. Like just putting on my pants, on a day-to-day basis is something that might take you 2 minutes, but it takes me up to 10 minutes, and I have to fight with my feet and trying to get them, to do what I want them to do. So, having clothes that are, accessible and having creators that think about us and that is really important because it also makes us feel like we, again, like everything in accessibility, it makes us feel like we're part of society, like people think about us. And another thing, for example, when I was a model, one of the creators actually, what she did is a lot of girls nowadays wear pants that are quite high up, and I'm trying to find the words in English, so sorry if I sometimes stutter a bit. But the thing is, when you sit down, it doesn't look good. So it looks good when you walk and when you stand up, but when you sit down, doesn't look that nice. And so she changed the complete shape of how those pants were made, so that when you sit down, we can still see, the same type of fashion trend on girls that are sitting down. So in that way, that is how I see accessibility in fashion.
Yeah, exactly. Both the practical elements of think about the fact that we have to get these things on in a completely different fashion. And the very first exposure I had to that, my mother has rheumatoid arthritis, and she couldn't bend down anymore to like get her pants around her foot, right? And her arms don't work that good, and gripping is hard for her. So tying shoes is not a thing. So she has to wear different tennis shoes that don't have laces. And love that those have gotten popular. That's made life a lot easier for a lot of people. But so these are not things that everybody thinks about, but it's very important. So what about you, Miss Tisha? What are some things that people might be surprised might be part of fashion inclusion?
Well, one of the things that I really like, Alex, that he mentioned was about how easy or difficult it can be for people to wear certain things. And so sometimes, Catherine, I like to be a little pot stirrer. And so often people forget language. Having policies that say, well, men are allowed to wear this, or women are allowed to wear this, or, people can't wear this, it's a problem. And one way specifically it can be a problem is we can think about certain celebrities and people who have been sick. They get really sick and they may be male, and they decide that they want to wear dresses because it's so much easier for them to wear and put on dresses. Well, if you have policies in your company that say men can't wear dresses or skirts or whatever, that is not only an inclusivity thing, but that's also, an accessibility thing. And so people don't think about that, and they should more often. And I know a lot of people are probably thinking, oh, we don't want men in our company wearing dresses. Well, that's part of the problem.
It is. And very much to your point, I'm so glad that you brought this up because this is something that I wanted to hit on. It always makes me laugh how people have assigned like certain types of clothing to certain genders, but it's not always been that way. So historically, and one of the one things that always cracks me up is I've actually heard somebody in reference to this conversation say our founding fathers would roll over in their graves if they saw men wear that. I'm like, let me back you up on that. They wore high heels, wigs, makeup, ruffly shirt. They'd be all about it. They'd be like, yeah, this looks about right. Cool, whatever. It would not faze them. It was a different time. And yeah, it was done a little bit differently, but still, it's the point. Kilts are historically a male fashion. Women have started stealing them back, which I'm thrilled about because I happen to like them very much. But dresses are very comfortable, right? They're very comfortable for a lot of people, and self included. The reason that I am wearing this style of dress, you may not be able to tell from the camera, so I'll describe it. It's very loose fitting. It's a very thin material. It's a very smooth material. And you'll notice it doesn't touch a lot of my skin. There's actually a medical reason for that. I have a condition called MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome. And when a lot of different textures and things touch my body, I'll actually start breaking out in hives, be itchy, be uncomfortable because my body thinks I'm allergic. Not really. There's not actually any danger, but my body just kind of freaks out. And who thought I would have a freak out body that just spazzes out for no reason? And so I have to wear certain types of clothes. It matters very much. People in the autistic community a lot of times are very particular about texture, that type. It actually makes them uncomfortable. So it's important to think of these things. But I also want to ask, and again, I'm going to circle back to Alex on this because I know you and I have had beautiful discussions about Pride. And I think that this is a great time because it's Pride and Neurodiversity Day and all these other things. So I love that we're getting to have this conversation today. When you're thinking about inclusion and fashion, and to Tisha's point, a lot of times people are like, oh, men shouldn't wear this, women shouldn't wear this. In your fashion model experience, to my knowledge, I don't know if Tisha, I've never walked the runway. I don't know about Tisha. Maybe she has. She's like, no, I didn't do that. I would fall over.
Walk it, I'll roll it.
Oh, sure, you rolled it. That's true. You went
We've
you
never walked or
moved.
rolled the runway, so
Excuse my ableist language. Excuse me. You moved down the runway. There you go. You progressed down the runway. In your experience, is fashion maybe starting to be a little bit more gender fluid? Are they starting to be a little bit more open with this type of thing?
Well, in my experience, yes. When I was a model, everyone was different, and at the end of the show, we could choose how we went down the catwalk. So after we wore all of the clothing, they said, okay, the last time you go down, roll down, whatever you want to do on the catwalk, you do it the way you want. And so some of the men wore heels, and some of them wore dresses, and I decided to do it, with not wearing a lot of clothes, because I wanted to show, what it is like to have a disabled body, and being able to be a model allowed me to, be proud of it and say, look, this is also part of society, and we are also here, and I'm not going to use the clothes to hide who I am, but I am going to use it as part of my identity.
Oh, I love that. And thank you so much for sharing that, because that's something else that we often ask people to cover up things that we find uncomfortable, whether it's a scar, whether it's an amputation, physical disability, whatever it is, right? Even interracial elements. Like we ask people to be more white, which, but I can't even, that's going to turn into a whole other show if we go down that funnel. But it happens all the time. And even things that just make us physically, even pregnancy. We know, Tisha, like we've seen, how many women have we seen? They're like, oh yeah, cover up your pregnancy. You don't want people to see that you're pregnant. So Tisha, when that's the case, how do you deal with that? How do you explain to your clients how important it is to let people still be comfortable and to let them just show their bodies as they are?
I am a big why person. So one of the things, even with the previous example that I gave, I always ask people, so why do you feel that way? Why do you think that way? And a lot of the times I've had clients that ask me, so how do we change those policies? I think I maybe mentioned to you one time before, Catherine, about recently I was doing some training, facilitating some training, and I had an individual director ask me, well, how do we change our policies to make them more inclusive when it comes to like bathrooms? And one of the questions I asked him, I said, okay, I said, well, how are your bathrooms structured? And he was like, well, we have restrooms for men, we have restrooms for women. And I said, okay, well, what do they look like on the inside? And he basically told me there wasn't a whole lot of differences. Some of them have more urinals than, stalls, and then some have both. I said, well, take the labels off the back that say men and women and put something that's unisex. Like, it's things like that are just that simple. And so he kind of looked at me a little bit, and I was like, well, why can't you do that? And I know this is very progressive, but this is where we should be. And so when they're asking those questions, I tell them very simply, you need to question why your policies are written the way that they are, how they disadvantage people, and what you are truly, truly able and willing to do to make sure that people feel more inclusive.
Absolutely. And I love, and I do remember that story, by the way, because I think it's freaking great. I really do. I think I actually kind of use that, by the way, just so you know, later, I use that, like, just so you know, this is how you take it. Like, genius. So it's really a simple matter of when people are trying to understand this, helping them to understand why it's not a big deal, right? And sometimes people need to be faced with their discomfort, and they need to realize, wait a minute, why am I discomfort? Like, why am I uncomfortable? Like, this person over here has this, but that doesn't affect me. It doesn't hurt me. It's okay. I'm all right over here in my own little space. It's okay. And so it is very important to just let people dress however they are comfortable. And the truth is that as long as the person is covered appropriately, right? Like, for instance, I can see why you wouldn't want a tube top dress at work. I want to be real clear about that. Okay. I'm doing a show. I completely understand that. These two are over. There you go. Over here are dressed far more professionally. So maybe use them as an example. But understand, you want people to work comfortably. in a way that doesn't inhibit them, in a way that will allow them to not have to be fidgeting, because you can't work well, right? If all day you're fidgeting and you're uncomfortable, or if you tell them you're less than, we don't like how you look, or we don't like this or that, it's going to inhibit their abilities. So you want to be kind. Yes, Alex.
No, go ahead. But I was going to say, a lot of companies ask, how can we feel people like, they can be open about whatever they're going through, whether mentally or about their disabilities. But I think clothing is really, really part of that, because
Yes.
you can be as open as you want about, well, please tell me why are you not feeling mentally well, but I'm not going to allow you to be yourself at work.
Yeah.
So that
Right.
doesn't work. It doesn't work, right? So
Right.
people need to feel like they are at home to a certain extent, obviously in a professional context, but
Yes.
that is really part of allowing an inclusive culture within a company, I think.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the psychological safety element. And when people say to me, how do I get people to disclose to me? How do I get them to be comfortable? How do I let people know that they're welcome here? The clothes and your policies and procedures are where this starts. I mean, Tisha, you and I have talked about this so many times. I mean, I can't even count like the number of discussions about it. Starts with those kinds of things. And you show people, you don't tell people, you show people that you care. And so when it's in your policy, just a general, Tisha, go on. You look like you got something smart to say. Go ahead.
Listen, that was I don't know about how smart it is, but it's definitely an opinion on something. But
You did have that look. You did have smart look.
Right. Absolutely. But yeah, so, and that's the thing, you hit the nail on the head with that. It's not just about what's in your policies, it's about what you are showing, the example that you're setting. And so often what I run into is I'll have leadership tell me, this is what we want to do. We want to make people feel welcome. And then months down the road, after the policies have been implemented and they want to know how things go, I'm talking to employees and the employees are like, yeah, they did all of this stuff, but they still give me those looks. Right. And I don't know if you saw me earlier, Catherine, when we were talking about Alex and I being dressed a little bit more professionally than you, but I kind of took my shoulder and I was like, I have tattoos, guys. Like, so, what's professional anymore, right? And so, I cover up most of the time because I'm cold, not necessarily because I have tattoos, but I have a lot of my clients' employees telling me that, yeah, they're still looking at me when I wear my tattoos, even though they're saying, hey, it's okay to be your authentic self and to, have tattoos that are appropriate and non-offensive, still be visible. And so, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yes.
And I think the interesting thing as well is, depending on the country you're in, it really depends on the culture. For example, I've worked in London in tech where the sales guys would have full sleeves and I have tattoos. And because I'm from Belgium, I would rather not show them, but then I would go to work and they would be just in a t-shirt and just their full sleeves, whereas in Belgium the likelihood of you seeing that is way lower because of the culture that we're in. So I think in Europe there is also an aspect of I don't know how it is in the US.
Same in the States. Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, it is really different, and that's also an interesting point of view. Like not only from a company perspective, but is it different depending on where the company is based? So maybe one part of the company is really inclusive. For example, when I did an event called Out and Equal, well, they had one of the people I worked with was from Citibank, and one part of the company was really, really open about the LGBTQ community, but then one part in a certain country was still really closed and didn't want to talk about it. So
right. Oh, that's an interesting point too. Yeah, because the company like you said, in Europe, the States, Canada, wherever, that can be one way, but then it can be complete if you're international. But also, let's hit on culture here too. So somebody coming in from a different culture may have different needs and expectations. And to use your example of tattoos, so there are cultures in which it is part of their experience to even have face tattoos. And you can always recognize these. They're very distinct. It's not going to be like a skull with like a snake coming out of it or some nonsense like that. It's going to be not there's anything wrong with that kind of tattoo, but my point is that's not what this is. they're very kind of distinct looking tattoos. And so to say that someone cannot have tattoos on their face is actually highly exclusive. And by the way, actually legally discriminatory, because sometimes those have religious backings, things like that. So there are plenty of times where you need to really watch yourself because they can actually sue you, and rightfully so. But I think it's very important to talk about culture. So for instance, in some cultures, it is very common to wear bright, vibrant colors, loose materials. Saris, saris are a great example. That's one of my favorite things to wear. I love saris. I absolutely, if I could just walk around every day in a sari, I'd be so happy with my life. I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But it's a cultural aspect, and headdresses can be a cultural aspect. And so you don't want to have wording that tells people, no, this is not welcome. So again, generic wording, right? Anything that's safety related is safe, right? Let's just hit anything that's about safety. Like there are situations in which, let's say my dress that's flowy and all this would be dangerous in like a manufacturing setting, something like that. So if it is a safety issue, 100%. Yes, Miss Tisha, you look like you have another opinion.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. I was like, you took it off. Yes, exactly. Yes.
Shoes would be one in certain environments. Like it's just not safe to have open toe shoes in certain environments, but then in most environments, it's perfectly okay. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. For men, men and women, rings can be different things. For men, cufflinks can actually be a problem in certain settings. Like I've seen people with suits. I get a tour of a factory and they're told, no, I need you to take your cufflinks off. Like for this reason, just for a minute, you can put them back on, like when we're done, but just for this little minute. But just thinking about things like that. You may need safety glasses, not your regular eyeglasses. You may need to get prescription. And there we come to that again. So workplaces, if your people need to be able to see, like with their glasses, if they need an aid, you need to provide that if they can't wear them underneath their safety goggles. That is something that you need to be able to provide for them. Ms. Tisha, what are your thoughts about that and other things like it?
Oh, I agree. And so I think we've had conversations about this as well too. So yeah, I mean, I think the problem with a lot of people is understanding, or with a lot of employers, I should say, is understanding what is required versus what's a recommendation versus what is absolutely not required. And so I think people may have some questions about, well, why should we have to provide that? We haven't been providing it. Well, the whole, doing things the way we've always done them doesn't mean that it's right. Especially when you're trying to implement some change. So yeah.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. And so Alex, I have a question for you, because this is one that just kind of always gets me in these circumstances, because this has come up. Is I have literally, this is not a joke, had a company say to me, well, do I need a wheelchair people dress code? That was the exact words he had. Tisha's face. That was about my face. They literally said, do we need a wheelchair people dress code? And I just kind of went,
yeah, I'm going to address wheelchair. I feel like it. Honestly, wow.
Yeah, I was like, what does that even mean?
You need to make the change Tisha class. That's what you need. But go ahead.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Like, oh, Lord Jesus, why? So I was like, why is this happening? But I do want to ask you, what are some specific, while that was obviously ridiculous, what are some things that people do, other things, you mentioned some earlier, but what are some other things that people might need to think about for people with canes, people with wheelchairs, people with walkers, et cetera, et cetera? What are some different things that people may want to consider in their dress code?
Well, I mean, going back to one of the points that you were making about the toilets, for example, which is a really, really big thing. If the toilet's not accessible, I can come to the office, but I'm not able to go to the toilet. And so there was a story that someone was telling me where he wasn't able to go to the toilet the whole day at work because the toilet wasn't accessible. And
real quick, I just want to hit on this. Putting a bar in does not make it accessible. It needs to be wide enough for wheelchairs. It needs to, be the right height. Like, come on, people.
Exactly. And that is one thing that I do on my social media, and I'm trying to do more and more. Obviously, just like we do here, I try to use humor because I think it's quite ironic and quite funny. But for example, if you go to an accessible toilet, everything's accessible, and then all of a sudden you wash your hands, you want to throw away the towel, but the trash, you have to open it with your foot. Well, your toilet is not accessible, right? So it's a little thing, but it does make a huge change, because it goes to show how they have not really thought about or not involved someone that has to
There
use
it is.
And I
There
think
it is.
everybody-
Involved.
I-
You and I have talked about this, Alex. Ask.
Exactly. Your story was amazing, by the way. But yeah, no, it's all about asking. And honestly, everything I think we talk about is always about the same thing. It's about involving people that it relates to, right?
Yeah.
Like if you had someone in your company that is in a wheelchair, you would never ask, do you have a wheelchair dress code? Because
Yeah, right. Like if you had him in that conversation, like why would you ask that? That's very weird. It's weird anyway.
They might say, Alex dress codes, because I always have special things, but it's really strange to hear a question like that. So
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a toilet, for example, but also in the hiring process, like we spoke about at
Yeah.
Allowing people to feel comfortable enough to tell you, look, I need software to be able to listen to the questions, or
Right.
I can't read the questions on the computer because I have a lazy eye, so I need to print the questions. And so those are little things that
Right.
really help us make it comfortable. And companies always think that it means a huge financial investment, but
Yes.
to be honest,
No.
It doesn't. It really doesn't.
No.
And it's not that big of a deal.
No.
In this day and age, there is so much software. There is so much options.
Oh yeah. In the Department of Labor, by the way, the U.S. Department of Labor found out that 56% of accommodations are free or the same cost as whatever else you were going to be doing.
I read that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
like why? Like why make it so difficult? So
Exactly.
Tisha, I got a question for you. Go ahead.
I wanted to mention really quickly too, since we, the HR person. So in addition to asking the person maybe directly, also offer some options to be anonymous, right? For those
Yes.
anonymously, because
Yes.
some people are not going to be comfortable sharing with you directly because of whatever maybe some relationship they had, what they've heard. But give them some options. You can do that through surveys. You can do that through some employee resource groups, and get information from there. Whatever the case may be. But yeah, provide that other alternative as well, so they don't have to be identified as giving those
and paid focus groups that are, and it can be not much pay, right? Because this is simple questions, right? Just hey, what would you like to see in a company dress code? What would you like to see in accessibility? But paid focus groups with people who have different diagnoses, who are for different cultures, who are different ages, LGBTQIA, all of this. That's how you focus groups, anonymous feedback, as you know how I feel about anonymous feedback. And stop asking, by the way, we're just gonna go ahead and say this again, because I need to say it as much as possible, because I'm seeing it more and more. Stop being weird in the application and asking people what their sexuality is, asking people for their diagnoses, asking people like, what? No, nobody wants that. And if you want to get general data to make sure that there's not any weird discrimination happening, there are anonymous ways to do that, where you make sure the candidate knows it's anonymous, where you can't tell who it's associated with, should not be associated with their profile. You just send them a link later and go, hey, we'd love this anonymous survey, blah, blah, blah. Don't be weird. Oh my God. Like I saw one the other day and it baffled me, because they legitimately said, what is your disability? And I was like, oh, yeah, that's face, Tisha. There again with that face. I was like, nope. Yeah, I even emailed them. I was like, okay, somebody needs to tell you, like, this is not acceptable. Please stop doing this. So I want to hit on this too, and both of you hit on it some, because I get a lot of, I see a lot. I don't really get a lot of this, but I see a lot of pushback on the LGBTQIA inclusion and transgender inclusion, and maybe even just somebody who likes to wear clothes that are not traditional to their gender, whatever the case is. Because I'm going to keep this one a little bit more broad, because we are, that's just kind of what we're talking about. And people always go, well, it makes other people uncomfortable. I can't have my staff being uncomfortable. Or some of my staff is afraid of this. Or I've heard all different versions, right? All different versions. And my take, and I want to get both of your opinions on this. My take is I tell them to look at your staff and tell them to grow up and to stop being self-centered. But then the HR lady comes out, right? And I go, okay, so let's talk about that. This is a neurodiversity. This is like let's talk about this. Let's talk about it from a different standpoint. And I go into the HR lady, consult on how to handle it better, but it is, there's, I always tell people there's a difference between inclusion and infliction. And inclusion is, we're going to let you be you as long as it's safe, you can't like come in there and shoot people up because you like to shoot people. That's not cool. But like you're allowed to be who you are and be safe and be healthy and be happy. You don't get to tell other people what to do with themselves, including things like how they dress, how they behave, things like that. As long as you're within safety guidelines, things like that. So Ms. Tisha, I'm gonna start with you and then Alex will finish with you. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I go right back to the why. It's very important whenever you are trying to implement a cultural shift to get people to understand, why it's necessary. You can't give, of course, specific examples or this person, because of this reason, or, maybe not even listing what certain disabilities or, issues that people may have are. However, you can let, your employees know that, the reason why this is happening is not just because of, inclusivity as a practice, as a buzzword, but because we want to make sure that people are feeling welcome in this organization and people are able to do their jobs better because, the studies, the reports are out there. Companies that have more inclusive environments see more productivity. Their employees are happy and retention is longer, right?
Yes. And, so, and by the way, real quick, if you want to look this up, folks, you can look up Harvard's done it. John Hopkins has done it. Psychology Today has published studies. Again, the National Library of Medicine, Boston Consulting Group. I'm sorry, Ms. Tisha, continue.
Oh no, you're okay. You're very valid point. Interrupt me anytime. So that's what I do. I go back to the why and I tell them why, and then I help them with the how piece. And everybody is not going to change their mindset, because some people are just stuck in their ways. But there are things that you can do, especially if you are, repeatedly giving those reminders and giving that information. There are things that you can do to kind of help your employees to understand that, hey, this is where we're going. And, either kind of get on board or, they need to find something else to do.
Yeah. Or maybe fire them. If somebody's not on board with your ethics and integrity, they got to go. They got to go. All right, Alex, what's your thought?
So before I give my opinion, I just want to tell you an anecdote. So yesterday I was going to a friend of mine who is an author, and she wrote her first book about disability and loss and everything. Amazing presentation. And one of the authors read a poem about, being queer and being part of the LGBTQ community. And he was speaking specifically about that. And he said, one day we were at the Pride and there was a white, straight, regular male that came up to us and said, you and your friends make me feel uncomfortable. And he said, well, lucky you that it took you so long to not feel like you belong somewhere, to not feel like you're a part of something. We have always felt that, and you only feel it now. So lucky you, right? So that's just an anecdote.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a really great point. I like that.
Honestly, now you kind of know what we go through, and it's only now, and it's not even on your daily life. You can actually choose to not be part of this or come to our events. We cannot do that because everyone looks.
This is all of society. Yeah,
exactly. Everyone feels uncomfortable with us, right? Yeah. So that was just an anecdote I wanted to share because I feel it's so relatable to the
absolutely.
Question. And then going back to what you were saying, I think I always believe we can try to educate. Obviously, some people will not want to, but if you want to make an inclusive culture, maybe people have never been confronted with it, just like
right.
Right? So when I was at VMware in the US, we had pods for LGBTQ, we had disability, we had all these different ones. But in the UK, we wanted to make like one umbrella where it was an inclusion group where we would tackle all of these topics so no one feels left out. So
Right.
if you don't belong to any of those groups, you can say, oh, actually, I can go there and it will be all types of people just like me, and we can discuss all of those different topics. And I think
Yes.
maybe that's one way that we can, try and educate them and say, look, maybe you don't feel comfortable, but we have
Right.
this event. Maybe join us.
Come
It's about
learn.
how
Yeah.
to be authentic at work, and maybe they'll be able to relate to something that goes back to them, like, oh, my
Right.
daughter ever felt that way, or oh, my wife felt that.
Right.
Then you can
They
kind
can
of
connect.
a more,
Yes.
a more educated culture and a more inclusive one, because I know from experience a culture where you can be more open is a culture where you're more productive and
Yes.
willing to work hard.
Yes. No, that's
That's
absolutely true.
challenging
Yeah.
people to figure out why they feel that way. Like I've
Yes.
asked people directly, like one-on-one, of course, I've asked them directly when they say someone makes them feel uncomfortable. And I'm like, well, can you tell me why? What is it about them or what they wear, what they're doing, or what they've said that makes you feel uncomfortable? I even had this conversation with somebody about someone's hairstyle. Like, why does that make you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's their hair. Like,
when they got to the root of it, it was just like, well, it's things that, I was told by family, or it's things that I've seen on TV. And it's like, okay, so are you uncomfortable based on something that they've done, or are you uncomfortable based on your perception of something that you've heard
yes,
and told?
that.
And so that part is a bigger piece of it. But again, like I said, going right back to that why, like, why does it make you uncomfortable? And let's see if
Yes.
we can, address some of that.
100%. Absolutely. And one of the best ways to do that, by the way, and this is a little bit of a plug for the three of us sitting here too, but get experts in who know how to have these conversations, who are in these different communities and can help you to get your brain around it, and get the right person that's going to have a curiosity approach and be able to really talk to people. There is a time and a place for the more, and I really want to give honor to this, to the aggressive and assertive approach. But when you're trying to help people understand and help them work through it, that's not the right approach. So make sure that you get somebody that really has that type of empathetic, curiosity-based approach. If you need help finding experts in different arenas, I know the humans, Tisha knows that, Alex knows the humans, reach out to us. We'd be glad to help you. So as we wrap up, I want to get final thoughts from everybody. For me, my final thoughts are exactly just, embrace your why, like figure out why. Dig into the why. Why is this my response? Why am I having this feeling? And when you have a bias, because it happens. I mean, I always joke there, and this is a true story. A while back, I actually developed a bias against people named Mallory. Like, what is that? Like, you can't just go around hating Mallories. There's actually a reason for that. But anyway, so I had to fix it. And so I did. I made a point to meet some cool Mallories. I figured it out. We got past it. Do some basic research, 60 seconds of real research with good sources. Not politically based sources, not religiously based sources. Do a combination of scientific and educational based sources, and then also individuals that are in that community. Watch their TikToks, watch their YouTubes, get to know them, because once you understand their humanity, it's gonna relax your brain and let you realize that this is a safe zone and that this is okay. So respond. And then my last thing is respond in curiosity, not ego. So next, let's have Mr. Alex give us his final thoughts about fashion in the workplace, and then we'll wind up with Miss Walley over there.
About fashion in the workplace. Well, I'm just going to speak from personal experience. When I was younger, I did a private school for like half a year, and I had to wear the same clothes every day. And I didn't know that my style was so important to me. But after 6 months, I didn't feel like I belonged, and it had nothing to do with the teachers, or it had nothing to do with my friends. It had just to do with my identity is in the clothes that I wear. And when I did the catwalk, it enabled me to be even more like that, to wear clothes that, most people, when they see me in the street, they're like, oh, I've never seen someone wear that, or oh, I love your shoes. Like, what is that? And
Yeah.
actually, it became the opposite. Where in the past, I would have tried to, like we were saying previously, tried to hide my disability. Like, don't look at me, because I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. And I think that is so important, whether in your personal or in in your professional life, is like how you feel and perceive yourself, right? Because if
Yeah.
you don't feel well, you're not going to perform well, you're not going to be good around other people. And I think that a big part of that goes how you clothe yourself and
Yeah.
your identity, whether with your tattoos, with your hair color, or whatever you want to do. I
Yeah.
think being comfortable is really, really key for you, for your company, and for the company culture.
Absolutely. And just showcasing who you are to everybody. That's part of inclusion, right? That's what we keep talking about is showcasing yourself. Well, what better way to do that than with your fashion and how you dress, how you do your hair? And like you said, that was beautiful, Alex. Thank you. And Miss Tisha, Miss Walley, wrap us up, lady.
Final thought here: if organizations, if you want to make some changes, what you need to do is ask the people in your company how best to make those changes. Not necessarily the processes, but you can do something as simple as, if you have a dress code policy, for example, send that out to your organization, request feedback, and then take that feedback and be sure to implement some of it. Have discussions about it. If you need to call in DEI experts to come in and do that, you need to do that. But that is the one of the best ways to make sure that you can implement those changes and you can make your environments much more inclusive.
Absolutely. And remember that there are 14 broad categories of inclusion and diversity and inclusion, and that within those, there's subcategories and individuals and all of this. So remember that it is not limited, it is not simple. And again, ask people, right?
Yeah,
Ask the people who would know.
I just wanted to quickly go back on what Tisha was saying, just really quickly. In the company where I was at, they had experts as well. Well, people that were in charge of DNI, and they were putting in strategies, but they weren't asking anyone within the company
Mhm.
what they wanted to do. And I'm out there. I'm someone that's really open about his disability. I'm not shying away from it because I think it also shows the skills that I have. So I would
Mhm.
go up to them and have conversation with them and with the VP and everything. But as Tisha was saying, not everyone wants to disclose it, and not everyone is as open and willing
Yes.
to. So it is your job as a company to bring in those experts, but also to make everyone feel like they can be involved in that process,
Yes.
and to put them in touch with those experts.
100%. Let your people speak for themselves. And with that, could not have ended better. I want to thank everybody for joining us. If you want to connect to these two beautiful humans, I highly recommend it. They're both on LinkedIn. You can also find them on different social media platforms as well. Connect to them. We're all here to support you. Be great and also dress great.